What would you do if you walked into a room where a woman was being erased in silence? Would you stay quiet, or would you speak? Before the deals, before the betrayal, before the truth exploded across that rooftop restaurant, everything began with a single moment of arrogance. The private dining room glowed like a glass palace above San Francisco. Chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. The city shimmered beneath them. But the real heat in the room came from two men who believed they owned it. Trent leaned back in his chair, smirking across the long polished table. You think she even understands a single word we are saying? He did not bother lowering his voice. Derek chuckled, slow and confident. Doubt it. But hey, $1 billion buyout for a quiet little sushi doll? I would take that deal any day. That was the spark. The moment the room shifted from business to something darker. At the head of the table sat Kamiko Hayashi, founder of Hoshiko AI, a woman who had built her empire from scratch with discipline sharp as steel. Tonight, she spoke no English. Not because she could not, but because she chose not to. Her silence was her shield. Her strategy. Her refusal to perform for men who already believed they owned her. Behind her moved Naomi Brooks, the young black waitress whose steps were soft enough to disappear. But her ears heard everything. The whispers. The smirks. The insults hidden inside casual tones. She watched the way Derek smiled between sentences, selling himself like a man who had never been denied anything. She watched Trent's restless leg bounce with impatience, waiting for the moment he could dominate the conversation. And she watched Kamiko, still, calm, regal. A storm held inside a single breath. This dinner, worth nearly $800 million, was supposed to seal a historic partnership. Instead, it became a battlefield with linen tablecloths. Derek lifted his bourbon as if giving a speech on stage. To global partnerships. And to a future where science knows no borders. Kamiko nodded once. Silent. Controlled. Her aid translated only when needed. The pattern was always the same. Derek spoke in long theatrical monologues. Kamiko replied in measured fragments. The aide kept everything neutral. And every time Kamiko answered with grace, Trent's patience thinned. Are we seriously negotiating with a statue? He muttered. This is insane. Naomi felt the sting behind every word. Not because they were aimed at her, but because she recognized the pattern. The dismissal. The entitlement. The cruel assumption that silence meant weakness. She kept pouring wine, kept moving, kept observing. Because even though no one in that room saw her, Naomi Brooks saw everything. Before we continue, if you have not done it yet, subscribe to our channel for more stories that will move you, challenge you, and stay with you long after they end. Trust us. You do not want to miss what comes next. Now, let us continue. Trent Langley sat beside Derek, younger, sharper, vibrating with the kind of hunger that made him dangerous. His dark suit gleamed under the chandeliers, his flashy watch catching the candlelight like a challenge. If Derek was the king of the boardroom, Trent was the blade he swung without hesitation. Across from them sat the woman they believed they were about to overpower. Kamiko Hayashi. Billionaire. Innovator. Founder of Hoshiko AI, the company leading the world in surgical robotics and neural interface engineering. Yet tonight, she was the mystery they could not decipher. Her hair was silver and perfectly pinned. Her dress, a deep indigo silk, flowed like still water. No jewelry. No makeup. Her presence alone carried more weight than their entire combined ego. She spoke softly, only when necessary, her aide providing brief translations. Her silence made the men restless. They interpreted quiet as weakness, because they had never met a woman who used silence as strategy. And then there was Naomi. To them, she was invisible. To the story that was about to unfold, she was essential. She moved with grace, refilling glasses, clearing dishes, watching them with eyes that missed nothing. She noticed Derek's smug glances, the way his smile tightened when Kamiko refused to engage. She noticed Trent's leg bouncing with impatience, like he was waiting for someone to acknowledge his superiority. And she noticed Kamiko, still, disciplined, holding her dignity like a weapon. The room sparkled with crystal and warm amber lights, but beneath the gloss, an undercurrent of danger pulsed. The air felt sharp, thin, ready to snap. The first toast revealed everything. Derek lifted his bourbon as if he were performing for an audience. To global partnerships, he said. And to a future where science knows no borders. He looked around the table, proud of his polished delivery. Kamiko simply nodded and sipped her drink. Trent leaned in, whispering loudly. Was that a yes or just a polite nod? Kamiko spoke to her aide. The translation came, neutral, short, emotionless. It drove Trent insane. Derek launched into long speeches about market control and innovation, his hands moving as if he were conducting an orchestra. Kamiko responded with calm statements, always brief. Always measured. Trent finally cracked. Are we seriously negotiating with a statue? He muttered. Derek forced a diplomatic grin. Relax. It is cultural. She is playing her game. But Trent didn't know how to wait. He snapped his fingers at Naomi without even looking up. Hey sweetheart, more of that Syrah. The word cut through the room like a whip. Sweetheart. Not a request. A dismissal. Naomi poured the wine silently, her face composed, but her pulse tightening in her throat. Later, when the aide translated another soft reply from Kamiko, Trent scoffed loudly. We should replace her with a chatbot. At least that would talk back. Derek laughed. Kamiko remained still. But Naomi saw it, the flicker in Kamiko's eyes. A wound opening. A truth recognized. They weren't talking to her. They weren't talking about her. They were talking over her. They saw a language barrier. Naomi saw something else. A mirror. And in that moment, Naomi understood, the storm had only just begun. Naomi poured the wine with steady hands, but inside, something hot and sharp twisted in her chest. She stayed silent, but her eyes were wide open, collecting every word. Later, Trent leaned back, stretching like a bored child. When the aide translated yet another calm reply from Kamiko, Trent barked. You know. We could probably replace her with a chatbot. At least that would interact. Derek chuckled on cue. Naomi saw it all, Kamiko's face still, serene, but her eyes shifting just slightly. A wound registered, then hidden. The kind of wound a woman like her had learned to bury 1,000 times before. To those men, she wasn't a leader. She wasn't a visionary. She wasn't even a person. She was a puzzle piece, a business target, an exotic inconvenience. But to Naomi, she was something else entirely, a reflection. A reminder of every moment she herself had been unseen. Naomi Brooks had learned to disappear long before she stepped into this restaurant. Not by choice. By survival. In classrooms where she was the only black girl. In stores where she was followed instead of greeted. In interviews where they smiled at her resume and doubted her in the same breath. Here, invisibility was part of the job. Move softly. Serve quickly. Speak only when spoken to. Make them feel important while making yourself disappear. But Naomi hadn't always lived in the shadows. Her childhood had been painted in color, red temple gates, gold autumn leaves, the sound of cicadas buzzing through Kyoto summers. Her mother had been a diplomat in Japan for nearly 10 years. Naomi had grown up folding paper cranes, running through temple courtyards, learning Japanese before she learned how to second-guess herself. In Japan, no one asked why her skin was different. No one questioned whether she belonged. She simply existed, and that was enough. Then came the return to the United States. Then came the stairs. Then came the slow lesson. Japanese spoken by someone who looked like Naomi was considered a party trick, not an accomplishment. Now, 24 years old, she balanced college tuition, double shifts, and dreams too expensive to afford. She painted at night. She sketched on the train. And she worked here, in a room where people pretended she wasn't there. But watching Kamiko endure insult after insult, something inside Naomi began to crack. A quiet pressure, building, rising, refusing to stay small. The air in the room grew tighter. Sharper. Unstable. And Naomi felt the shift coming, like a tide she could no longer hold back. Naomi didn't just see a billionaire sitting silently. She saw a woman fighting a war with no weapons but composure. A woman powerful enough to build an empire, yet still disrespected because of her accent, her gender, her silence. A silence Naomi recognized too well. A silence she had worn like armor her whole life. But tonight, that armor was starting to crack. The conversation had started to unravel. Derek drummed his fingers against the table, impatient. Kamiko answered each question with her usual precision, soft words, measured tone, translated only when necessary. Her calm only seemed to inflame Trent. Finally, he exhaled loudly, tossed his napkin onto the table, and leaned forward with a smirk sharp enough to cut. "We want to buy your company," he said slowly, pronouncing each word like he was talking to a child. "Do you understand?" Derek laughed, not because it was funny, but because he believed he owned the moment. "Maybe we should bring out flashcards," he muttered, dripping condescension. Naomi's fingers tightened around the wine carafe. She kept her back turned, pretending to check the list. But every syllable hit her spine like a slap. It wasn't just the words. It was the assumption. The idea that if someone didn't speak like them, they must be less. Kamiko blinked once, slowly. She didn't break. She didn't respond. But the air shifted, just slightly, like the tremor before an earthquake. Then Trent delivered the final insult. "I swear, man. This is like negotiating with a bonsai tree." Derek snorted. "Silent. Decorative. Probably older than it looks." Naomi turned around, her pulse hammering in her ears. Heat rushed up her throat, not fear, but something deeper. Something righteous. She saw Kamiko, still poised, still regal, but behind her eyes, Naomi recognized the storm. The quiet pain of being reduced to a caricature. Then Naomi felt a hand grip her shoulder. Her manager, Foster. "Don't get involved," he whispered sharply. "You speak only when spoken to. Do your job." Naomi nodded. But something inside her had already snapped. Kamiko murmured something in Japanese, soft, untranslated, meant for no one at the table. Naomi heard it clearly. "Is there no one here who sees me?" The word struck like a match inside her chest. This wasn't ignorance. This was erasure. And Naomi could no longer stand behind silence. The room had fallen into a tense, fragile stillness. Trent leaned back, satisfied with his bonsai joke. Derek poured more bourbon, smug and certain he had already won. The aide remained motionless. Kamiko didn't move. Not yet. Then she whispered again, a sentence cast into the room like a plea, a prayer, or a final test. And Naomi understood every word. And this time, she couldn't stay quiet. Naomi heard every syllable. The words slid into her like a blade made of truth. "Is there truly anyone here who sees me?" It wasn't just a question. It was an ache. The kind of ache born from being erased in plain sight. Naomi stepped away from the service station. Her hands trembled for a moment, not with fear, but with a rising, unstoppable certainty. Foster's warning still burned in her ear, but that whisper from Kamiko, it shattered every rule she had ever followed. The hardwood floor echoed softly beneath Naomi's shoes as she approached the table. Derek looked up, annoyed. Trent frowned. Her manager froze, jaw slack with disbelief. Naomi kept walking. She stopped beside Kamiko, bowed low, not the shallow corporate bow taught in training manuals, but the deep, reverent bow reserved for elders, mentors, and masters. A bow that held respect, solidarity, and courage. When she rose, her eyes met Kamiko's. Steady. Clear. Then, in crisp, flawless Japanese, she spoke. Hayashi-sama. I apologize for speaking out of turn. But remaining silent in the face of this kind of disrespect would be its own betrayal. If you will allow me, I can help. Derek's glass hit the table with a dull thud. Trent's mouth hung open. The aide stared, stunned. Kamiko's eyes widened, not in shock, but in recognition. Like a lonely lighthouse finally spotting another signal in the fog. She reached out gently, touched Naomi's arm, and whispered back in Japanese. Thank you for seeing me. And just like that, the power in the room shifted so sharply it was almost audible. Kamiko leaned back, posture relaxing for the first time all night. She gave Naomi a small, deliberate nod, not just permission, but trust. Naomi stepped forward, turned to Derek and Trent, and spoke in calm, measured English. Ms. Hayashi requests that I translate her statements from this point forward. She believes it's time you understand the full weight of what is being said. Trent laughed nervously. Sure. Let's hear it. Naomi exchanged a brief sentence with Kamiko. Two women aligned in quiet defiance. Then Naomi opened the leather folder resting on the table, scanning the contract page by page. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from a clarity that felt like purpose. And she began. Naomi wasn't a lawyer, but she had spent countless nights helping her mother proofread diplomatic briefs. She knew what manipulative language looked like. She knew what traps sounded like when dressed in polite wording. Her eyes paused on Section 7b. This clause, she said slowly, gives Valancer unrestricted rights to renegotiate all intellectual property licenses after the merger. That includes the surgical AI Ms. Hayashi personally developed. Derek blinked. That's standard merger language. Naomi shook her head gently. No. It's intentionally vague. It gives you the ability to sell off her patents or strip the core technology without her approval. Trent waved a hand dismissively. It's a safeguard. Just in case things shift. Naomi didn't even look at him. She flipped to Section 12. This non-compete clause isn't written to limit conflict of interest. It's written to erase Ms. Hayashi from the industry. It prevents her from consulting, teaching, or even speaking at conferences for 10 years. She lifted her gaze, steady as steel. You're not trying to buy her company. You're trying to erase her legacy. Silence fell hard and heavy. Derek's jaw clenched. Trent fidgeted with his pen. Their polished confidence was cracking. Kamiko hadn't spoken a word, but her eyes said enough. She looked quietly triumphant, like a chess master watching the board shift exactly as planned. Naomi closed the folder with deliberate calm. Then Kamiko spoke, soft, precise. A single instruction to her aide. He nodded, reached into his blazer, and pulled out a small silver device. Sleek. Quiet. Dangerous. He set it on the table, pressed play. First, static. Then Derek's voice filled the room. Let's get to the final offer. Cut the incentive clauses. We'll absorb her executives. She'll never know the difference. Trent's laugh followed, sharp, cruel. She's lost. Feed her whatever we want. The translator will handle the rest. Their own voices. Their own words. Broadcast back at them like a verdict. Naomi didn't flinch. She translated anyway, even though the meaning was already painfully clear. They assumed Ms. Hayashi didn't understand anything being said. They joked about manipulating the terms. They planned to dismantle her company in front of her, relying on her silence to keep her powerless. Trent shot up from his seat. You can't record private meetings without consent, that's illegal. Naomi turned to him, calm as winter. So is fraud. Derek stayed seated, but the color drained from his face. For the first time tonight, he saw Kamiko. Truly saw her. Not as exotic. Not as quiet. Not as a target. But as a fortress he had foolishly attacked. And Kamiko didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The recording clicked off. And the silence that followed was judgment. Naomi folded her hands in front of her, grounding herself in the silence that followed. Her voice, when it came, was low but unshakable. You didn't just underestimate a woman. You underestimated the wrong woman. And you forgot that silence doesn't mean surrender. This wasn't business anymore. This was war. And Kamiko Hayashi had just fired the first shot. The door burst open. Naomi barely turned before her manager stormed in, his face red, his eyes burning. Foster was usually icy, controlled, a man who spoke in raised eyebrows more than sentences. But tonight, he looked like a kettle ready to explode. What the hell was that? He hissed, ignoring Derek, ignoring Trent, ignoring Kamiko entirely as if she were invisible. You left your station, he snapped. You inserted yourself into a private negotiation. You spoke to a guest without permission. Naomi stood still, shoulders straight. She didn't defend herself. She didn't look away. You're done, Foster spat. You're finished here, Naomi. I don't care what your excuse is, you're fired. Immediately. Trent scoffed from his chair. Finally. Something in this place makes sense. Naomi felt the burn in her chest, not shame, not regret, but something sharper. She had done the right thing. She knew it. And this was the price. Pack your things, Foster barked. Security will escort you out. Naomi opened her mouth, not sure what she was about to say, but she never got the chance. Because a deep, measured voice cut clean through the room. Actually, she's not going anywhere. Everyone froze. A tall black man, early 40s, calm, impeccably dressed, stepped into the doorway. His navy suit didn't shout wealth. It whispered authority. Control. Power. My Jones, he said, walking forward with quiet confidence. Executive Director, North American Innovation Alliance, and one of the primary financial partners behind Hoshiko's U.S. expansion. Foster's face slackened. Derek went gray. Trent looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. I've been sitting in the main dining room for the past 20 minutes, Mike continued. Listening to that recording. Watching how each of you behaved. Watching who acted with integrity, and who didn't. His eyes locked onto Foster. You are not firing Naomi Brooks tonight. In fact, she deserves a formal apology. Foster opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Every ounce of authority he thought he had evaporated in front of him. My turn to Naomi. And for the first time that night, she felt truly seen. Not as staff. Not as background. But as someone who mattered. You were the only person in this room who understood what integrity looks like, he said quietly. Naomi's throat tightened. The room shifted again, not from fear or tension, but from truth. The private room had transformed. No longer tense, but charged, grounded, reset. Foster stepped back, his pride shattered. Derek and Trent sat silently, the arrogance drained from their faces, replaced with something that almost looked like fear. And Naomi stood at the center of it all, apron tied neatly around her waist, posture steady, but no longer invisible. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the woman who had stopped a multi-million-dollar deception with nothing but her voice and her courage. Kamiko turned toward her, her expression soft for the first time that evening. She spoke in elegant Japanese, her tone warm, grateful. Naomi listened, her chest rising gently with each syllable. Then she translated for Mai, offering a small nod. Mai stepped closer. Miss Hayashi has a request, he said, directing his words to Naomi alone, not to the room, not to the executives, just to her. She would like to formally offer you a position with Hoshiko's global strategy team. Not as support staff. Not as a translator. But as an executive aide, someone who understands culture, nuance, and the unspoken. Naomi blinked, once, twice. Based in San Francisco, Mai continued. You would help guide our U.S. expansion. Advise international partnerships. Led diversity and inclusion initiatives worldwide. And then he added, gently, deliberately. Your tuition will be fully covered. Any graduate program. Anywhere in the world. Housing included. Starting salary befitting the value you've shown tonight. Naomi's breath caught. The floor under her feet felt unreal, like she had stepped into a life meant for someone else. Kamiko rose from her chair and crossed the room. She didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she took Naomi's hand in both of hers, holding it softly but firmly, the way one warrior acknowledges another. You saw me, she said in accented English. When no one else did. Naomi swallowed, her voice trembling with emotion. I would be honored, she whispered. Truly. Kamiko smiled gently. Then come with us, she said. We have work to do, real work. And in that moment, the door Naomi had been pushing against her entire life didn't just open. It blew off its hinges. A new future stood waiting, and Naomi Brooks was finally walking toward it. The consequences came fast. Within 48 hours, news of the failed negotiation leaked, not from Kamiko, not from Naomi, but through the invisible channels of the tech world. The recording reached oversight committees. Valancer's board reacted instantly. Derek Caldwell was forced to resign in a private meeting that lasted less than an hour. His golden parachute? Gone. His name removed from the company website by noon. Trent Langley followed 2 days later, claiming personal reasons. No one believed it. The empire they thought they controlled had collapsed, undone by their own arrogance, their own words. Investors panicked. Shareholders demanded answers. And the press feasted. The story was too powerful to ignore. Two wealthy executives, caught on tape manipulating a foreign female founder, brought down by a black waitress with nothing but truth and courage. Headlines didn't need embellishment. From server to savior. The woman who stopped an $800 million power grab. Social media exploded. People praised Naomi Brooks, praised Kamiko Hayashi, praised the courage it takes to speak up in a room designed to silence you. As for Derek and Trent, their downfall was swift. Doors that once opened automatically now slammed shut. Conference invitations vanished. Partnerships dissolved overnight. They had underestimated a woman who stayed silent with purpose. And another woman who refused to stay silent at all. And in doing so, they delivered the world a lesson it desperately needed. Real power doesn't always wear a tailored suit. Sometimes, it wears an apron. This wasn't just a corporate scandal. It was a story about dignity. A story about what happens when silence is mistaken for weakness, and when people are judged by their accent, their skin, their gender, or the uniform they wear. Naomi Brooks had never been just a waitress. She was a young woman carrying years of lived experience, fluency in a culture most people didn't understand, and a quiet strength many people overlooked. She saw what others refused to see. She heard what others ignored. And when the moment came, she chose courage over comfort. And Kamiko Hayashi, yes, she was a billionaire. But that night, she was also a woman dismissed, mocked, and reduced to a stereotype. Her real power wasn't in her wealth. It was in her stillness. Her discipline. Her refusal to break before small men with loud voices. Both women faced a room determined to define them by silence. But in the end, they redefined that room. Most people don't see what's right in front of them. They see titles, skin tones, job descriptions. They assume. They categorize. They move on. But the world changes when someone finally stops to listen. And Naomi listened. She heard everything, and she changed everything. This was a black story. But it was also a human story. A reminder of what happens when someone overlooked becomes the voice that changes the entire room. If this moment meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you once ignored, or someone who once stood up for you, let it ripple. Share it. Let someone else hear it. And if you want more stories like this, true stories that challenge how we see each other, stories about justice, dignity, courage, humanity, stories about the quiet voices that reshape the world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're not done telling them. Not even close.